Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to the last day of Open Studios and consequently the last day of Open Studios public program. As usual, we'll have two presentations this evening, starting with Hamja Hassan, one of our current participants, and followed by a conversation between Maxime Weirich and Frédéric William Dam. I will describe a little bit more what they will be doing later on. But it is indeed the end, but you can still find all of the videos of the public program and the activities that we develop over the past 7 days of Open Studios online, so make sure you check that out. But without further ado, I'll give the word to Hamja and his Radical Roundtable, Neurodiverse Institutions, Neurodivergent Alliances. Thank you, Hamja.
Thank you all for attending, and thank you for everyone at home. It's been really great to be part of the Open Studios, and there's been so many great writers and artists and designers. You make me feel quite humble. My life mission is this book, Shy Radical, which we showed, and the book, which I hope go on beyond this room. Can we put the thing? Great. So there is a hashtag for today, which is hashtag JVE Radical 2. I'd like the discussions that take place in this room to go beyond this room, to go beyond the Netherlands, and eventually change the world, of course. And if you have any other questions or comments, I'd like that stream to flow on and on and on. Until we overthrow extrovert supremacist neurotypical society, of course. And I just had to plug, this is a magazine I've been collectively editing since I've been here, called Asylum, which was part of the radical mental health movement from the 80s. I've just, in the last year, I've joined the editorial board. And so many of these discussions, it's a permanent open call. So if something I say triggers a poem, memory, drawing, this is a permanent forum for that discussion to go onwards. So the 18th of June, which is just recently, was Neurodiversity Pride Day. I don't know how many people in this room are even familiar with the term, but neurodiversity was coined by an Australian sociologist called Judy Singer very recently, like 1998, and it's one of the recent sort of progressive social movements. So a lot of the research used to be about how do we find, say, a cure for autism, and maybe the majority of research should go to how do we make the world better, how do we make institutions better, how do we make government structures better, how do we make employment better. So the question isn't what's wrong with me, it's like what's wrong with society and social structures. The neurodiversity is primarily led by people diagnosed on the autistic spectrum, but it encompasses a whole range of conditions. So ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, epilepsy, forms of language disorder, as they're called, Tourette's and tic syndrome. And yeah, Judy Singer actually gave the keynote speech. There was actually a really good Neurodiversity Pride Day that took place in the Netherlands, and Judy Singer, who's the founder of the movement, I actually wasn't aware of her existence until this day, which shows how much the term has really penetrated public institutions, and also coming from Britain. I actually find Britain actually has a more progressive, integrated role, which I'll expand on later. But I was also quite pleased to see on the same day as Neurodiversity Pride Day, BIN, which is a new progressive party, which I know some of the other participants actually voted for, and some of my progressive Dutch friends, were that the Sylvia Simmons was actually awarded a Neurodiversity Inclusive Politician of the Year. Actually, I don't think we have a neurodiversity inclusive politician of the year in England, so maybe we're not as progressive. We certainly don't have a party as progressive as BIN, but I don't think the British electoral system allows for that. But I found it really interesting that, you know, that all these other movements, which like Black Lives Matter and moves around decoloniality and gender, that this was considered part of the same stream of social transformation. So this is a room I just talk about all the time. So in Tate Modern, you actually have a right to quiet. I think the reason I liked to go to galleries and got into art as a child and as a teenager was because I liked the quietude of galleries. It was the only public space where this was protected. And I almost felt it was sort of an identity. I didn't like playgrounds, rowdy playgrounds. I didn't understand clubbing. I didn't understand parties. I still don't today, especially in the Yanvan Academy. And I don't understand why people go to private views. They seem like a really moronic way to appreciate art. So in the Tate Modern, there's this quiet room. It's the room for neurodiverse people's family or anyone who would like to spend some quiet time away from the gallery environment, and it's protected. On the other hand, Tate does do these forms of accessibility and inclusion. So if they have a program for young people, they'll bring in like skateboards and DJs and everything I despised as a teenager and a child. And in an effort to bring people in, but it actually repels me and makes me think. It feels like, there's a lot of attacks now on public institutions, especially museums, libraries, especially in the UK. I can't say what the situation is in the Netherlands, but the austerity and neoliberal programs mean certain public institutions we took for granted. So as a child, I always went to public libraries and are being demolished en masse. And one way we could think of it would be maybe as a simple economic neoliberalism versus public institutions, but could also think of it in a sort of identitarian way. There's certain ways of being, certain sensibilities, certain types of people who are being sort of cleansed from public view, from having a centre part in the public sphere. Another thing I found interesting was a very similar space in Tate Modern is the multi-faith and contemplation room, which you can see here. And actually my space, which I've included in the open studios, which is a functioning Islamic prayer room, which me and Odessa can pray in together. And if it wasn't for the COVID regulations, which only allowed 2 people to pray at the same time, probably do whole gatherings of the Maastricht Muslim community. And it's actually very similar to the quiet room, and it's a simple white cube space, and anyone can pray in it. I have done. Tate Sheikh, who was in the talk yesterday, introduced it to me. It's somewhere near like the Duchamp urinals and other iconic moments of contemporary art. But they are primarily the same. But I also find it interesting that actually most galleries don't have either rooms. There's no statutory requirement to. You have big institutions like the V&A, one of the biggest museums in the world, which has a huge Islamic collections of Ottomans, Abbasids, and blah, blah, but they won't have a multi-faith room and they won't have a quiet room, despite probably a lot of the researchers being on the spectrum. So I invented this nation state called Aspergerstan, which you might have heard of, which is slightly visualized in the film, which is sort of a utopic state for neurodiversity, introversion, quiet, awkward people, and a beacon and homeland. And it's inspired by the languages of other national homelands from, I think I first read the draft constitution of Kurdistan, actually, when I actually drafted the constitution, but also languages from other utopic states like Cuba, the Soviet Union. I even read parts of Ottoman constitutions, and then I made this mishmash of a state. And I with my other neurodiverse friends who have different diagnoses from, I'm actually not diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, I'm diagnosed with bipolar disorder, which is affective disorder. My brother's diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, and I used to campaign for him when he was in prison. But I thought I may be undiagnosed Asperger's and it would make sense. And my book is adopted, and its fan base, like a lot of autistic people tell me it's the best book written about autism ever, whilst I just wrote it how I experience the world. But anyway, some of my other friends with other diagnoses, such as dyspraxia, such as Daniel Oliver, who you're going to meet later, they say, why couldn't we create a state called Dyspraxistan or Dyslexistan, and how would we be in lines? And then when we've gathered together, we've invented other. So this is the shy power salute, so this is like black power. So this is like shy power. It's a bit like a cough. Hashtag shy power on Instagram. And so they were like, oh, this could be like Dyspraxistan. like dyslexia. I don't know what, but we were imagining these sort of alliances. But there's a sense in which if you take bullying in workplaces or primary and secondary school, it pretty much is a similar type of person. A similar type of person is stigmatized. Whole languages, when you think about stigmatization of what you call geeks and nerds, a lot of that is essentially targeted at people who have Asperger's syndrome and as a way of stigmatizing and ostracizing them from a very early age to know they're inferior and different. There's very hopeful signs. So many of us in Britain felt really hopeful about the Jeremy Corbyn government. Sorry, it wasn't in government. That Jeremy Corbyn became the leader of the Labour Party in the opposition, who'd been involved in lots of campaigns, including supporting my family campaign, Palestine, every progressive cause. And within the branch of his Labour Party was something called Neurodivergent Labour, led by this autistic trade unionist called Janine Booth. And this is the first meeting. You can actually see me at the back with my hand up, voting for motions. And so the laws which I drafted in the Aspergerstan constitution, some of them were almost adopted by trade unionists, drafting motions and policy for workplaces. Like, some people don't cope well with open plan offices or sitting in circles, or the Christmas office parties, like my idea of like hell. So, and there's also been a backlash from that, from the establishment and the Conservatives. So the Spectator, which is where all the evil bastards of Britain gather, like the Boris Johnson sort of to the most racist, reactionary people who maintain safe, has had a whole backlash against neurodiversity movement, saying it's dangerous too. So this is some of the other languages that I've sort of developed. So there's certain, when you go for job interviews, I've been rejected from many job interviews for, I know, not being outgoing or assertive enough, whatever that means. There's certain languages and the fakeness of Western politicians electioneering, Labour politicians always going like this or something like that to gather your vote. And there's whole ways in which communication and political communication can be developed. So, I don't know, how can staring into space be considered a political gesture, or staring into the floor or turning your back? They all embody forms of contentment or discontentment or friends and alliances. And so I developed this lexicon of democracy. I found I was rejected in a lot of job interviews for places that I spent most of my youth, so like the South Bank Centre and stuff, which I liked, again, because I was quiet and stuff. And so it's been adopting a lot of curriculums. In the US, the Brown University, which is a Ivy League university which has an open curriculum, developed this syllabus called Neurodiversity, Science, Politics and Culture, where my book is read alongside Octavia Butler and Steve Silverman, which is an honour and very humbling. And this syllabus, it's because of the nature of the open curriculum in Brown University. So people from social policy come and read it. People from theatre studies do it. So the entire multidisciplinary spectrum, and everywhere from, Goldsmiths teach it in media and communication. I don't know how. It's also taught in English literature, fine art. And it's classified. It's interesting, when you're in a university library, it's under so many different classifications. So some people actually classify it as sociology. And on the left is a book. There's been whole sorts of fan fiction. I call it fan fiction. That's a bit insulting, but there are books that takes the vocabulary that I developed in Shy Radical. So this book, The Autistic Turn, which is about feminism and computing, which is written by a Turkish-German artist called İpek Bukat, based in Kassel. Uses the vocabulary of Shy Radicals, and she gifted me this book and said I was the one inspired. It was I think that was the first piece of new work inspired directly by Shy Radicals. And talking again about accessibility, so one of my favourite places to tour was the Autumn's Art Festival, which is a biennale in the University of Kent, led by Sean May, who's a autistic artist. And this is the accessibility pack which you get at the door. So you can stick a sticker on yourself which says, red, I probably do not want to talk to anyone. Yellow, I only want to talk to people I know. Green, I'm happy to talk but might struggle to initiate conversation. And then you have earplugs if you want to block out noise. You can put a sticker on saying if you want a hug, and or a sticker to say I'm happy to be photographed. But I found there were lots of people commenting on this when I posted it on Facebook who were neurotypical, but saw forms of protection and liberation. A lot of my female friends who'd experienced sexual harassment in art spaces and leftist activist spaces said that they'd love to have that, to have men stop hitting on them, for example. So I feel there's something, if you have genuine liberation for autism or neurodivergent people, your liberation is bound with so many other people. I also found something that talks on Islamophobia, like there's ways in which that intersects too. So there's some wonderful forms of, I'm going to call them resistances. So Harry Giles, who's an autistic identifying artist, did this chill out corner, which he designed for like private views and social gatherings, which define much of success in the art world and networking. And you can actually find this online, so do look up the plan. And it was just a way of him being inclusive. I felt so happy when I saw this and so validated. And like, there's a whole subculture again around neurodiversity and zine culture. So from the underground, from the punks, and I've often acted as distributor so I make friendships through other zine makers and redistribute their work. And there's zines about ADHD women, dyspraxia, and other forms of things. But there's a certain thing that comes with zine subculture. So this is 2 zines from the Brown University Disability Archive. So there's one zine calling you "fuck you, I'm dyslexic," and another one saying "don't fucking look at me, thanks." But it's not the attitude of a charity or an NGO or a development discourse or any sort of liberal pity. And I've also developed with Shape Arts, which is another progressive charity which goes on the social model of mental health. I developed a whole archive for them. This is another wonderful autism called Autism Room 101, and just things that they hate. So things that make noise, the bullshit citrus vanilla smell that smells like betrayal, Donald Trump, and so forth. And this is Asylum Magazine, which I've mentioned, which I edit, which you're all welcome to contribute, anyone listening and anyone in the audience. I've been very interested to hear your stories, and I guess it's part of the Mad Pride movement and stuff. So when I launched Shy Radicals, a book, 4 years ago, and my journey's still going, we included a long table, which you can find on YouTube. Do just message me on Instagram at Shy Radicals if you want the link. And we did a long table around neurodiversity. And Daniel Oliver, who I'm about to introduce. So this is the format of a long table. It's a form of experimental theatre developed by Lois Weaver. And you can go online and see all the etiquette. I mean, this is just some of the rules. It usually has no conclusion and is like a dinner party conversation. But there's a way in which it's been adapted and readapted for like a neurodiverse audience. So maybe having headphones, but you can just write on the table. You can leave when you want. And I don't know. I think if you think of the way people communicate, say in Parliament or in a Congress, or the type of people that can run for electoral office, like only certain people can be seen to represent me. I can't represent myself. Like what forms of communication? Imagine Parliament was done like this long table. Like how would democracy look differently? How would the decisions be made differently? But the other thing is, this is a form of experimental theatre. But one thing I'd love to do is just have this the way, like going to the pub or like going for a drink or whatever. Like imagine this was just integrated into everyday life like that. This was a launch again at DIY Cultures, the last ever, hopefully not the last ever DIY Cultures. And I guess Shy Radicals has always been a form of building alliances with people, either people sort of oppressed or subjugated for different reasons. So I think, and sometimes in a light-hearted way. So at the opening, I worked with this group called Guerrilla Aspies, but I also worked with people who are fans of the character Lisa Simpson, who's probably the greatest character ever. I consider myself a cross between Lisa Simpson and Homer Simpson. And also looking again at history. So I mentioned in the earlier talk the figure of Clement Attlee, who was the Labour Prime Minister in 1945, who introduced universal healthcare, the welfare state, ended British Empire, and won 2 landslide elections against Winston Churchill. Was the leader of the Labour Party for like over 20 years, when it was a decent thing. And it said he replaced a cult of personality with a cult of anonymity, but he was always an awkward, shy person, but was still seen as the best leader of the country. So I'm going to introduce Daniel Oliver after me. I think Daniel Oliver is like the gang leader of neurodiverse creative practitioners in Britain. He's been incredibly important for me. At the Harold Pinter Theatre in Queen Mary, we sort of gather, and I've made so many friends, allies, and collaborations. The last big thing I wrote was in his book called Awkwards, about his dyspraxis praxis, and I wrote a chapter with him called Neurodiversity, Fantasy and Revolution, which is 3 neurodiverse practitioners in conversation. He also authored this wonderful thing you can download for free, which is a neurodiversity guide for the Live Art Development Agency. Again, just message me or use the hashtag JVE Radical 2 if you'd like me to give you links. And I've also done this wonderful rant called Why Daniel Oliver is an Important Artist on YouTube, which you can easily find and search. But yeah, the Alliance of Dyspraxistan and Asperger's done. So yeah, this is a Twitter hashtag. I don't think anyone used it yesterday. So if you'd like the sort of conversation to keep rolling and have further comments and links, I'm just going to now introduce Daniel Oliver.
Hello. Can I check, Hamza, did you get the video?
I did get the video, and I sent it to Hamid's email. But I'm not sure if you share screen. I don't want to have a boring technical conversation. But
that's fine.
Okay.
I just wanted to make
and tell me when you need to share it. Or do we need to do anything?
Great. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, great. So yeah, so thanks ever so much, Hamza. Thanks for having me. Sorry to open with a boring technical question. I just didn't know if it got lost along the way. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here, and I am a big fan of Hamza and his work. I had my second vaccine yesterday, and I'm feeling a bit dozy, so I'm going to just read a thing I wrote, if that's okay. I'm a dyspraxic performance artist, and I sometimes teach at universities, and I sometimes write about dyspraxia and performance art. And if we can show the video, you can see a sense of what my performances look like, if that's possible.
Yeah, can't you share screen?
Oh, you want me to? Okay.
I don't want to have a boring technical conversation, but yeah.
Let's leave it. But this feeling right now that we're all having.
I'll just go. Just carry on.
It's fine.
Yeah.
No, this. Okay. So this thing that's happening now is like one of the affects or kind of moments or kind of experiences that I often aim for in my performance. And the video you would have seen kind of would have exemplified that. It's basically me shouting really loudly, I'm too loud in a public space. But I feel like this technical odd conversation sort of did a similar thing. So this is my book that Hamza talked about, which is called Awkwards. And I'm just going to use...
I've made them order one.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you. And in here, it just sort of describes my dyspraxia, if you don't know what it is. So I'm going to read that bit. I'm diagnosed as dyspraxic, and according to my diagnosis, I have particular difficulties with executive functioning, so managing myself and my time and my writing and my resources, and I have difficulties imposing order on activities, like not getting videos on time to talks I'm doing. Dyspraxia was formerly known as clumsy child syndrome, and according to David Grant, psychologist, clumsiness is the most important aspect. My difficulties with planning and order lead to a visible clumsiness when I'm performing, and writing and stuff like that. I was diagnosed because my teacher at the time saw that I was writing clumsily for an MA I was doing. The visible part in the case of dyspraxia is the element of clumsiness and difficulties of motor coordination, but there are these hidden aspects which are the underlying difficulties of attention and memory and perceptual skills. So these underlying aspects have the potential to cause awkwardness in social situations. And I'm kind of into and write about and think about awkwardness for that reason. This is the book about it. Hamza's in it, as he said at the back, and it's important because it explains that awkwardness is important and awkwardness should be celebrated because awkward people are important and should be celebrated. And being dyspraxic makes you awkward, being shy makes you awkward. And so I've been making performances that muck about with this kind of awkwardness and for about 18 years now. I used to think that the reason that they were awkward was because I was a punk, and then I was diagnosed with dyspraxia, and I realized that they're not punk, they're dyspraxic. My friend overheard two important performance programmers talking about me, and one said, I think Daniel Oliver is the only straight, white, cis male artist that I like. And the other one said, that's because he's a fucking weirdo. And I wondered which bit of that, weirdo-ness is dyspraxia. And I had lots of questions like that, like which bit of me is the weirdness and which bit's the punk and which bit's the dyspraxic. And someone told me that I should find out more about this thing called neurodiversity, which sounded great. And so I began to organize these long tables that Hamza mentioned in order to kind of find out in public what this word neurodiversity was, what it meant to people. And lots of neurodivergent artists came to those discussions, as Hamza said, and I learned a lot. And those are my favorite kind of projects where I'm kind of learning something in front of everyone. One of the things that came out of those long tables was the study guide that Hamza showed about live art and neurodiversity, which is written for the Live Art Development Agency. And that's lots of interviews with neurodivergent artists. Another thing that came out of the long table events was meeting Hamza, as he said. So he came to the first one, and from there we just started inviting each other to give talks and things like this. And I invited him to write for the book, as he said. So since meeting Hamza and reading his book and watching his film, I've been thinking a lot about being awkward and clumsy and loud. And when I think about shy radicals, I think about that time when I was 15 in class and the head teacher was visiting our classroom and he was talking about how the world is all made of different sorts of people. And he put his hands on my shoulders, and bearing in mind he had never spoken to me in my life, he said, for example, this is a very quiet person, isn't it? And it was clear that he expected me to affirm this in some way, loudly for everyone to hear. And I was embarrassed and I thought he was an idiot. And so I just loudly and abruptly shouted, no, I am not a quiet person. And it was really awkward. It was bad awkward. And so I've been thinking about how this bad awkwardness or this loudness and how this dyspraxic me and the likes of me would fit into Aspergerstan. And this is what I've come up with. There's a quiet room, like Hamza mentioned, like the one at the Tate, and it has quiet people in it doing quiet things. And then a person like me comes in wanting to be quiet, but they've got themselves in a state all shouty and messy and tripping up over a doorstep or a chair and dropping stuff everywhere and shouting, I'm too loud, just shouting over and over again, I'm too loud, but not with shame and also not with insistence, but just sort of gently, joyfully explaining what's going on. And one of the quiet people would stand up and quietly say, Lexicon A, looking at the floor. And the quiet people would stand up and look at the floor, not to shame or to insist on anything, but just sort of a gentle, joyful acknowledgement of what's happening. And it's become a sort of ritual or a nativity play or a ceremony or something. And no one quite remembers how it starts, but we do it every year. That's me.
Thank you. I wondered, I've given you this title. I think if all of neurodiverse creative practitioners was Wu-Tang Clan, you'd be like the RZA. Right, I always describe you as a gang leader, and often for neurodiversity is led by people on the autistic spectrum rather than people with dyspraxia, and what unites us?
I think for me it's like, sorry?
I was just gonna say, apart from being weird.
Yeah, I think that I think from the long tables, like one of the things that I think we're good at is like because neurodiversity is so diverse. So you will have someone at the long table that is letting themselves be the loud and maybe angry person that they feel they are, and that the neurodiversity brings. And you will have the anxious person, the quiet person. And I think there's something about being honest about what kind of inclusivity can lead to, and being kind of cool with that, or not cool with it, but being cool about being not cool about it. Feels like that feels like really the really exciting thing for me about gathering together neurodivergent people.
Cool. I hope one day you'll come to the Netherlands and we'll do another gathering. I actually met a lot of neurodiverse people in the Netherlands. I think one of my dearest friends, Hurt, he might be watching this at home, is neurodiverse, and he'd actually never heard of the word neurodiversity before he met me, and he also never met another neurodiverse person in his life. And I felt this sad, this sense of isolation, and you could hear, his son had dropped out of universities, and the sort of if only he had a gang like ours, wouldn't he be stronger? So thank you, Daniel. I'm gonna move on to another cis white het male called from Europe, Western Europe, called Jonathan Griffian, who we're gonna see on the screen. And Jonathan, you might know Jonathan. Can we go to the Jonathan? How does it work? Anyway, you might know Jonathan because Asha Karami and I worked for many months together on a literary production called I Love Psychiatrists, where Jonathan and I reflected on the death and suicide of Kurt Cobain and neurodiverse institutions. And it was really good to have a local understanding. I think Jonathan's an autistic person who's not so keen on the term neurodiversity, so it'd be interesting to hear his view, and I'm also interested to hear his. He's also a very noted poet. He wrote a collection, Mazda 626, which I recommend to everyone who can read Dutch, and he's going to read a poem and talk. So, welcome, Jonathan. Dutch, my token Dutch person. I always have a token.
Can you all hear me all right?
We can all hear you clearly and see you on a big screen. Yeah.
So I wanted to read a poem, but I guess I have to start by telling a bit about myself. I was diagnosed as a very young child, at somewhere in the beginning of the 90s or end of the 80s, somewhere a really long time ago. So I never really knew anything else. Like Daniel, I'm also very, very dyspraxic. I would constantly fall down as a child. My mother always said that I could be standing, staring out of a window, and just fall down, from a standing position. I've always gone to special schools, which are separate and unequal in the Netherlands. They put a lot of emphasis on working with your hands at special schools. And I was always terrible at anything, how do you say, practical, artistic, like cutting things, painting. I would always make a great mess of this. So I never really liked school. I played a lot of hooky, I think it's called. I cut a lot of class. And at a certain point, I just started working in caring for the elderly. And while I was doing this, my career, or if you can even call it that, as a poet started to take off. And I was writing my first collection and working in the daytime at the elderly home and writing at night. And I just got a huge burnout. and I stopped working in healthcare, and this was the moment that I started writing my second collection, poems with a Mazda 626. And I just got this new medication called dexamphetamine, which kept me up at night. And during these nights, I was thinking about what caused me to get so stuck in life. So there was a lot of talk about a quiet room. The motto, I think it's called also in English, of my second collection of poetry is by Sarah Manguso. I would like to read that first. The relentless naming and sorting of contemporary poetries has always suggested to me a group of autistic kids locked in a quiet room, trying to organize their way out. And I thought it's sort of pejorative, you know, but I like to interpret it in a different way, you know. I think we can succeed in organizing our way out, you know. So I would like to read a poem in Dutch. Sure. I know there's not a lot of people outside of the Netherlands that speak the language, but
would you be able to share the translation with the link? Can you share screen?
Let's try.
Yeah, try share screen and then put the link up. So we'll have the English translation while you read.
Let's see. Yes, I have it. Share screen. Share.
Is that going to work?
Right.
Oh, great. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
that's an essay. There you go.
Can you guys all see it?
Some people can. You can sit near it if you can't read it.
Okay.
Yeah, but the people at home can. So
Okay,
we have Dutch readings here. Don't worry. Just go ahead.
Okay. PDD-NOS werd in 1990 ingevoerd omdat psychiaters graag een DSM-categorie wilden hebben voor net niet-autistische kinderen, die net niet autistisch genoemd mochten worden. Omdat de kinderen maar aan 1 of 2 van de 3 voorwaarden konden voldoen, of niet op tijd hadden voldaan aan de voorwaarden, of pas op latere leeftijd konden voldoen, en geen van de psychiaters wist hoe te helpen als het niet meer goed te achterhalen viel wanneer het begon. Zodat ook de net niet-autistische kinderen zich voortaan geholpen zouden weten en de ouders aanspraak hadden op de hulp voorhanden begin jaren 90. Ze noemen het onder elkaar een verlegenheidsdiagnose. En later staat het ook in de folder. Antroposofische kinderpsychiatrie, creatieve psychotherapie, fysiotherapie. Ze zeggen dat het voor Jonathan langdurig noodzakelijk is. Anderen noemen het goed voor mijn ontwikkeling of kijken voor zich uit zonder mening. Ze zeggen dat Freud nooit bestaan heeft. Ze hebben een hologram verjaagd uit Wenen. De Hongaars-Amerikaanse psychiater Thomas Sas zei: alle psychotherapie voor kinderen is een beetje, maar niet heel erg overdreven gezegd, kindermishandeling. Die stelling is mij bijgebleven. Heeft Thomas Sas gelijk gehad? Ik heb dat dan niet doorgehad. Valt toch wel op, zou je zeggen. Als het niet zo suf was, niet zo vernederend was om te zeggen. Als het niet zo vernederend was om te vragen. Is het oplopen van een trauma niet zoiets als voor het eerst klaarkomen? Het gebeurt je en je weet wat het is. Het lijkt het beste op een andere plek de schoolbaan door te lopen nadat het net het autistische kind een tweede kind bijvoorbeeld de neus heeft gebeten. Of dat tweede kind is op een andere, maar even vreemde plek gebeten en het net niet-autistische kind heeft het gebeten. Misschien schaamt de oudere broer een paar lagen hoger zich voor het gedrag van zijn broertje. Is het gedrag gestoord omdat de professionals zich ook geschaamd hebben, terwijl het broertje dit vertoont. Je hebt het kind gebeten omdat het zonder waarschuwen je brood verplaatst had. En je had je broodje juist daar neergelegd. Tijdens de dansactiviteit zoek je een lichtplek op.
Oh, thank you. So when we have Dutch readings, Eric Linder, who's our writer in the Jan van Eyck Academy, he's a Dutch writer. He always does like a 1-minute summary of what was said. I don't know if you'd like to do that for those with eyesight. Yeah.
Right. It's like how do you say a summation of the history of the diagnosis PDD-NOS and how it how meaningless it basically is, and how people with the diagnosis are treated.
Okay, brilliant. You can also find that online on, is it Poetry International? Poetry International,
yes.
And type Jonathan's name, you'll find the translation. We can ponder and reflect on it more. I'll post the link later too. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Whilst we're talking about diagnosis, the next person I'm going to introduce is called Dolly Sutton. She's written a wonderful little book called DSM-69, which is a parody of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the American Diagnostic Manual, which I consider is a brilliant, funny, hilarious book, which should be in the library, and I will make it there. Dolly and I actually met each other in Bedlam Psychiatric Hospital, not as inpatients. So Bedlam, which that phrase comes from, is an actual psychiatric hospital. It's slightly outside of London. It still exists as a functioning psychiatric hospital, the world's oldest psychiatric hospital. And in the middle of the world's oldest psychiatric hospital is actually a contemporary art gallery, which is also a functioning contemporary art gallery, which is my favourite place to hang out, and the Museum of the Mind, which is a museum of psychiatry. So I met Dolly there where she launched DSM-69. We've become one of my dearest friends and one of the best touring partners. We did an amazing gig together at Anarchist Bookshop. And she curated a show called, which I was in, about the effects of austerity on us low-income mad people. And I think do you still describe yourself as a professional mad person?
Yes, hoping for retirement at some point.
Okay, and go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Angela. Yeah, I'm just going to talk a little bit about my experience. I mean, it's quite interesting you talking about Tate Modern and how well they're doing, because my experience of them 20 years ago was the total opposite, but I'll get to that. So yeah, I'm a writer, so I've written a few books. I'm a filmmaker, I'm a performer. In fact, my first ever performance was in Amsterdam about 20 years ago, and an artist. And I do it with my creativity is that I put normality over my lap and smack its naughty arse. And I've done all sorts of different things. I've sectioned government departments, the UK government departments. I've set up a charity called Help the Normals to help those poor normal people. I've TripAdvisored psychiatric institutions. Basically my work is along the lines of satire and making trouble. That's what I say. But when I was 14, I had my first psychotic episode, and actually did nothing with my life for the next 15, 16 years after that. I was just too scared. Would sit in my bedroom, too scared to leave my chair because of the psychosis, because I was hearing lots of voices and seeing lots of horrible things and thinking I was to blame for a lot of what was wrong with the world. And when I hit 30, I decided on my 30th birthday to either try and find my life in the rubble or kill myself. So I chose to be an art, to do something creatively. And but the problem is when you come to the real world or the normal world in your 30s, your first love, your first job, your first career, your home, your relationships are new things that for the normal people they did spend stuff in their teens, and that's humiliating. And you go to seek psychiatric help. They just teach you a different way to feel shame and humiliation. So and actually I found the art world to be no different. And here is my story about Tate Modern. One of the things I did was join an arts organisation run by mad people for mad people. It was called Creative Roots. We were based in South London, and we did awesome things like put on Bonkers Fest. Anyway, we were looking for art organisations to collaborate with, and one of them was Tate Modern. But when we described ourselves as just being a bunch of mad people who wanted to make art, they wouldn't have us in the building unless we brought somebody like a doctor or a nurse or an occupational therapist. So what I did, I did, a few of my friends and I did protest, but I won't tell you what the protest is because we haven't been found out. So that will be, on my deathbed, I'll probably say what I did. But anyway,
So I just had to interject. I haven't had a totally positive experience of Tate Modern, and I've actually got an apology from the head of Tate Exchange, who disclosed some psychiatric history which I didn't consent to, and put me into this patronising liberal NGO charity frame, which I again didn't consent to. So, and I'll send you it for fun. So but anyway, carry on.
It's like I just think I think it's not just art. Well, I think the sanitised world humiliates a lot of people, and me having a kind of brain of ill repute, which means I've got the gift of making other people feel awkward. One of my powers is to turn this sense of feeling awkward and sharing it amongst people who don't understand or have not had much experience of it. So any kind of oppressive personal systems, I will share an experience to make them feel awkward. And I learned this basically, if I had gone to like an occupational therapy colouring in class, I wouldn't have learnt this power. That power came from meeting a bunch of people from Mad Pride in, I think, 2001, who's, they were saying, don't be embarrassed about being, a sensitive person in this world. We'll promote you, we'll celebrate your creativity, and, we'll make madness the new rock and roll. That was their catchphrase, which to me was cool being a, 20-something. And, over the, decades, I just realised asking me to be normal is asking too little of me. And I don't want to be part of the world. I'm very happy, being part of these kind of these bubbles, which are, encompass mad art, mad creatives and neurodivergent creatives. Because I don't want to be assimilated into a system or society that only gets behind people up to now with a dildo. So I am, unless we can, we can return with a bigger dildo, I don't want to be part of the system. But I'm glad there are spaces in mainstream organisations that are beginning to open up so a lot of other people could be part of it. But also, I'm very happy just to be a separate entity. Yeah, I don't want to, yeah, like I said, I don't want a simulation. I want to hijack other things and turn it into something that's, better for us. And you were talking about the kind of quiet activism of Rosa Parks, I think. I can't remember where you talked about that, Hamdia. But I think that's a perfect way to reclaim art spaces. It's just to sit down and refuse to move until things happen, if that's what people want. And I think the last thing I want to say is, like, if people are really interested in inclusion, I'll say that you only really need three things: give us more money, give us space, and give leadership roles to us. Not me, because I don't want to be part of it, but people who want to be part of it. I think give space, give money, and give leadership.
That's a great manifesto for us to live on and work on. So I'd like to now introduce Asma El-Badi. She's who's going to come up on the screen. I'm very pleased to announce Asma has been accepted. She'll be one of our Jan van Eyck participants. I think you'll be arriving in November. Asma's just released a collection of poetry called Belongings, which I recommend to everyone. She's a filmmaker, poet. I think you're an Adidas model as well. Yeah. And I think you're gonna start talking about your experiences with dyslexia.
Yeah. So hi everyone, I'm so happy to be here. I guess I'm just gonna start with my story. Growing up, I was that kid in class that always had like red markings on my pages because I couldn't spell. And at the beginning it was kind of like, okay, I feel bad because I can't spell, right? But then I think after a while, especially when I got into like secondary school, it became like, okay, I've heard this like 1,000 times. Like as teachers, you now should know that I can't spell, so just let it kind of go. And it was always kind of made to be this thing that like was a barrier, as if they couldn't understand me because my spelling was slightly off. And I remember like there was times where I'd go on the board and I'd write things and then I'd come back and then like even my friends would laugh at me. They'd be like, you spelled it wrong. That's not how it's supposed to be spelled. And then they'd kind of laugh. And I think what it kind of did for me was made me not want to be part of the world a lot. So what I used to do is I'd go home and I'd write poetry. And my teacher once taught me how to write poetry when I was in like primary school. And that was the only form of writing that I absolutely understood, because I felt like I could put a full stop in the middle of the sentence if I wanted to. I could put it at the end. It could just go the way that I wanted to, and it didn't have to have a specific structure. So I guess that was something that I kind of kept doing, and eventually like I went to uni and I didn't know, like this whole time I did not know that I was dyslexic. And I decided to go to university that was really far from like the main universities. And I think the reason I went there was because my tutor was so welcoming. And I'd come from like a faith school and different kind of schools that like made me feel like I didn't belong in those spaces, and that like I had to be a specific kind of Muslim. My mom actually wears a niqab, so she covers her entire face, and she was a teacher in my schools. So people thought I would be like her, and all I wanted to do the majority of the time was like be in the art rooms and be in the sports classes, and that was it. And I remember like at some point, one of my teachers actually told me, you're gonna fail in life because of art and like PE and spending so much time in those spaces, and you should concentrate more on the sciences. And I had a bad experience basically in school, but then when I got to this like university, it was so different. And what they actually did for me was they opened up my mind to other possibilities. I went in thinking I was going to go into fashion in my foundation year, and then when we did the photography course, the tutor kind of grabbed me, took me to the side, and was just like, you're going to study photography for the next 3 years under me. And I told her, no, my parents know I'm going to do fashion. I came here to do fashion. And it took them like 3 months to convince me to finally kind of do that. And one of the reasons they told me they think I should go into photography and video was because they felt like I had so many ideas, and if I went into fashion, I would be so restricted. So over the following years, I ended up really loving photography and video. And I think because at the same time I kind of got diagnosed with dyslexia, and then one of my biggest kind of skill sets was the fact that I was visual, and then it kind of all started making sense. And now, like as an adult, and like during COVID especially, like there were so many situations where I felt like I had to write or had to communicate like everyone else, and I really struggled with it. Like even the application form, like I really struggled. I actually ended up having a lot of help just to kind of write, because I don't like writing in an academic way. I prefer to kind of express myself using my voice or visually. And I guess for me, it's always been really difficult to kind of explain that to people, and especially different brands and organizations when I'm working with them, because they always give me the work in the way they think I will understand it. So it'll be a brief with loads of writing on it. And then I'll ask for a phone call or something visual, and it feels like I'm being a nuisance. But I'm just like, my brain as a dyslexic is going to trip over like certain words. It's also going to try and fill out blanks. And if you don't give me those blanks in a different kind of language, I'm not going to understand them. So one of the things that I thought I would never end up doing and would never actually ever do is write my own book. And I felt like if I do that, it will expose all my spelling and my grammatical issues and all this kind of stuff. But during COVID, I decided to actually do that, because I felt like my work should reach people that maybe like want to express themselves, or might find things in my poems that like they can relate to. And a lot of like my poems actually are about like mental health and being Sudanese and like so many different things. But what I love the most is kind of taking those poems and creating like visuals of them. So even though I do have this collection of poetry out there, I still kind of like want to keep going and creating like more visual things for like other people to kind of see, because for me, language is like smelling and touching and feeling and hearing. And if I'm just giving people the work on paper, sometimes they don't get to experience all that. And as a dyslexic, I'm very visual in my mind, and I kind of want everyone to see everything that I see. I guess I can end there.
That's a very beautiful point to conclude on. You can see a lot of Asma's poetry, films, and talks on YouTube. I'd recommend browsing them. Some of them are really stunning, and I really look forward to seeing how she'll flourish and develop at Jan van Eyck Academy. I think we've got 10 minutes left. So I'm going to give all those 10 minutes to questions for anyone in the audience, on Zoom, or in the theatre now. Felix.
Thank you everyone for sharing your stories, and Hamidra for putting this together. I think this is a very important conversation for us to be having here, and to hear all these voices. I was just curious, Asma, about your poetry. When you ended up writing your book, did you work with a copy editor to take away those spelling mistakes, or did you keep the spelling mistakes and the grammatical so-called mistakes? Or did you keep them as they were?
Honestly, I wanted to keep them, but the publishers felt like it would be better for people to kind of understand if everything was in there. But I think in the future, I would love to create something that's actually like purely the way I write. Like it's spelled wrong, you deal with it, you know, because I have to always look for Google and try and find the spelling. So you should do that too, I guess. Not you, but like people.
I would love to read that. That'd be great.
I just completely make up my own words, and that, I just hope they continue as well. So they don't have any dictionary definition as part of it. Yeah, does anyone else have any questions?
Thank you so much, Hamza, and thank you all for speaking. This is such a wonderful moment. And super nice to meet you, Asma. Super happy that you'll be joining us November onwards. I don't know, I was just thinking about, from an institutional point of view, and Hamza, you've been sort of pushing us in a very good way to rethink ourselves. And usually we think art institutions are super progressive, and they would have all these things in place, and they would understand much of what's going on in the world, and try to sort of adapt to that. But in fact,
that sounds like you're describing the Netherlands there.
Yeah, but it's not. It's not.
I think they're super progressive.
Exactly. So, but this idea of progressiveness, yeah, exactly. There's this idea of progressiveness, which is it is not. So, how would you say? And maybe this is a question to you, Hamza, and maybe also to the rest. How would you say art institutions or institutions in general could change themselves? What kind of attitude should they adopt in order to be successful in that? So maybe I'll give it to Hamza first, and maybe
It's going to be really
someone else
quick,
can.
which is I think all art institutions should collect zines, because zines have an autonomous, punky, informal way of actually communicating that really reopens these sort of bureaucratic managerial structures, which are often the problem in terms of not having proper communication. And then when you make a zine, you always know there's someone out there. Yeah, so I consider my life a zine, but and collect all these neurodiverse zines inside the Jan van Eyck collection. But anyone else to contribute?
Can anyone else maybe also online? Yeah. Yeah, please go ahead.
Oh.
Well, I think a lot of people in the art world and in art institutions have like a college or university degree, and there's I feel very little room for people without such an education. The art world is barely visible for people who didn't go to university, I think. So maybe try to look outside of the university for interesting artists, writers, poems, and so on.
Well, I thought Asma had something to say on that.
Thank you. Maybe Asma, can you also?
I think I was just going to add that, like, having different ways of actually people applying, because sometimes it's always like paperwork and forms and this kind of stuff, but some people find it so much easier to send an animation, you know, for example, as a CV, or send like an illustration of what they do and stuff like that. And actually we have so many languages that we speak, and being open to receiving an application that isn't the same way that we've always been trained to kind of write would be like amazing, and would open up so much opportunities for people like myself to kind of join in.
Thank you. There's okay. Someone from the public online?
Can they speak it?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Go ahead. Who's that? I think you unmute yourself. Is that? Was that a hand up?
I don't think so.
Anyone can contribute on Zoom right now to the conversation of any questions, and I'd love to hear from you. And it can be a comment too, or yeah.
Okay, so maybe there's another question. So we've been talking about neurodiversity. How do you connect that to other realms of how do you say it, difference, emancipation, such as religion or race issues, gender issues? How do we, because it seems that all of these things are connected. As an institute, within the limited capacities that you have, these are other questions. What kind of sort of in a structural way, what kind of ways can you build? Because these institutions don't have the means, in fact. We also don't have the knowledge, and we don't have the capacity most of the time. And I don't know how at Tate, when this was established at Tate, and what Tate exactly does in order to tackle those issues, although I feel that the UK is much further than the Netherlands, for sure.
It feels so good to hear that.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know how this is in the US.
I'm going to ask that to Jonathan. Have you been to the UK, Jonathan?
No. Yeah, just.
Sorry?
Have you been to the UK or England? Do you think we're more progressive than the Netherlands?
I've been to Scotland several times.
Okay, that's a better part of the UK.
Oh yeah, I do love Scotland. It's great.
Yeah, the English is where all the bastards are from. Like.
Well, yeah, they're from London, right? The people from Newcastle are pretty great.
Okay, thank you.
Can I add something?
Please do.
There was a question about connecting neurodiversity to other social movements. And there's this great essay by Martha Feynman, it's an American, how do you say, rechtsfilosoof, a philosopher of legal system, who wrote The Vulnerable Subject and the State. And she writes that everybody under the law is treated the same. And there's like no, how do you say, attention for the different circumstances people are in which people are unequal. And in the American legal system, you kind of have to prove that you are the subject of discrimination by showing like a history of this discrimination. You have to build a narrative, just like Hamja did in an amazing way, I guess. But she thinks that we should talk about the vulnerability rather than all these separate movements like the feminism, neurodiversity, anti-fascism, and so on. We should just think about how to compensate vulnerability.
That's a very interesting, poignant point to ponder on. I think we have one final question.
It's not exactly a question, it's more of a comment or sharing my train of thought. I think Hisham asks, how do you make this change? And I think the question then comes to mind, or the comment is then, there is now awareness, there's a conversation ongoing. And the next thing is then to make it part of the agenda. For instance, the institution is speaking about climate change and the urgency. And I think that's how you can take that first step, make it an agenda, because there's already an existing structure of how things get into the system. And that is one of the first steps that you take. And so from here, the conversation continues and it becomes an agenda, and there are ways that change can happen because it's not fixed. You know, everyone is different, every institution is different, the possibilities are different. And so it's looking inwards of what you have to offer and whether you really want to include these spaces. And then you have this conversation now that you have the awareness, and then there's continuity. And so that's the most, not most important thing, but that's one of the things to look at. It's the question of continuity. After this conversation, do we then go back to sleep? Or do we say, okay, it's an agenda now, so what's next?
Cool.
Yes.
So yeah, as he says, the conversation continues. I think we have to end here now. Do tweet all your thoughts to me at Shy Radicals is my Instagram, and the hashtag for today was at JVERadical2. And I'd love to have this conversation continue. Do contribute to Asylum Magazine, make your own mental health zines. read this wonderful book that you get from the web shop, which says my plan for the world. And I'd just like to thank you, all the wonderful speakers. Really look forward to having you in Maastricht, Asma. Asma, Jonathan, Dolly Sutton, and Daniel Oliver, and thank you for everyone at home, and thank you for just coming here on the final day and being with me and sharing this conversation.
And thank you, Hamza, for organizing this event and the other two that we witnessed in the past days. Thank you to all of your guests for the amazing contributions. You're all invited to join us in about 10 minutes for Signs of Life, a conversation between Maxime and Frédéric.
I'm just confused.
Thank you, everyone. We're almost done. This is the final event of Open Studios. So, yeah, sad faces all around. I'm happy to be here with Frédéric Willem-Daam and Maxime Weigers, who will be in conversation under the motto of Signs of Life. So, without further ado, take it away, guys.
A nonverbal communication. A new generation that no longer expresses itself in exudes-based sentence constructions or elitist literature, but in simple, round visualizations. A dialect of clinking champagne glasses, of flames and full lips. A little guy with sunglasses or with tears streaming down his face like two waterfalls. A squatting monkey. A cat with hearts instead of eyes. Hearts of all colors and sizes. A flamenco dancer. Snowflakes. Country flags. Busts of plumbers. Professors. Aladdin Sane. They had developed a whole range of dingbats, a growing army of symbols to enforce a sentence or statement, to represent our needs. Slowly but surely, in our everyday communication, they replaced the dot at the end of a sentence. And where in the past that dot closed the sentence, the emoji did just the opposite. It opened the door to all kinds of different meanings and interpretations. I was hopelessly looking for the right door, but all attempts to express my state of mind in these depicted traits felt forced.
Yeah, welcome, welcome everybody.
Yeah. Yes, welcome everybody. This was an excerpt of my last novel, Signs of Life, which is coincidentally also the title of this conversation me and Maxime will be having. And the result of this conversation, or this is maybe the final moment of what began as an email by Bruno at a certain point in March, I think the 8th or the 9th of March, Bruno knew that I was drawing pictograms, and of course also knew of Maxime, his work around the history of these emojis and these signs, and decided to introduce us to each other. And out of this first introduction, in which I translated a part of my novel that I put in the email and sent to Maxime, like, oh yeah, that's a coincidence. I've been having thoughts about this subject. Let me frame it like that, and eventually grew this sort of cooperation and this lecture as a final result, I guess.
Yes, during this time we had these very weird overlapping coincidences that we also want to highlight and that we also integrated in our work. In the time when he sent me this mail, he was in quarantine in Iceland,
Yes.
And also during this time, there was this eruption that was all over the news about volcano activity that shadowed the sky, and it wasn't really clear if Frederick can come back or how this will turn out. So there was this double moment also, like having the talk. He was there also. The guy I'm dealing with in my work was also there during, like in a young age, giving lectures, meeting Dieter Roth there and making prints. So I always thought about Frederick having kind of the same journey there.
Yeah, it was this weird coincidence where Maxime was working around Wolfgang Schmidt, and Wolfgang Schmidt had been doctoring or his thesis or working as a professor also in Reykjavik. And at this moment that Bruno introduces us, I was also in Reykjavik. Dus I didn't know all of these things, but I think for Maxime that must have felt like some strange planets aligning. And then my book is called Signs of Life, or Tekens van Leven, and translated in English, this results in Signs of Life. And this is coincidentally also how Wolfgang Schmidt calls the language he was creating with his pictograms. So we were off to a good start.
So I want to read you now a short paragraph of the catalog I just published together with the museums in the Leopold Hirsch Museum in Düren and the Museum für Neue Kunst Freiburg. The exhibition is still on display, and the catalog just appeared 2 weeks ago and is also available in the shop. If somebody wants to read it, you can always ask me. I hand out some copies, and I will read you a small part of this of this text contribution I wrote together with Philip Nielsen, and historian who deals with the history of emotions. He focuses on how things are perceived during certain times, and this is a short excerpt. Ever since the standardization of emojis by the Unicode Consortium and the implementation on almost every digital device, emojis have become an essential part of communication. They continue to be refined and diversified further in annual cycles, resulting in an increasingly complex catalog of signs that aims to bring together the great possible varieties of areas of life, emotional states, and the different sociological and cultural characteristics of its users. A pictographic snapshot, a treasure trove for the archaeologist of the future who will dismantle the needs and desires of a society by studying the endless numbers of blah blah chambers. Now let's take a closer look at the nearly forgotten signs of life created by the artist and graphic designer Wolfgang Schmidt. Whether used in a text or strung together on their own, emojis enable us to enhance personal statements with the aid of visual agent. Before emojis were introduced, few people had direct access to such a pictographic tool. This perceived lag motivated Wolfgang Schmidt 40 years before emojis would experience through their breakthrough to define and design his own catalog of signs relevant to himself and his own intellectual and creative interests. In their formal structure, the signs of life he conceived follow the design principles of clarity and rationality through a systematic design approach. They are formulated as a system with an underlying grid that steers them along uniform paths and makes them expandable and combinable thanks to a coordinated formal language and proportions. But their conception and application went even beyond that. Schmidt claimed that he had completed between 1972 and 1979 a total of 262 of the 893 signs he had originally planned, and which he collected in a meter-long card index. Starting with his own body, he developed over the course of decades his own pictographical science system in an attempt to measure the cosmos of experience. Our sense perception is multifaceted, autonomous and self-guided, and Schmidt's science of life embody these qualities. To read them is to feel them. Where written text tries to put words into sequence to create meaning, Schmidt's design work opens onto a visual plane, where the perception of science produces feelings rather than information. Schmidt states, content, almost everything, human possible, impossible, what one is, has, can, in, of oneself, as oneself, apart from oneself, central, non-central, profound, senseless, transcendental, moronic, etc., this and that, now and then, here and there, anyway, why? Because. What you can see here is an installation he planned for a museum where you can see a layout of a wall piece where he puts all these drawings for science on a wall that is like 7 by 8 meters. Here you see a poem he writes with these signs for a print edition he made with like 9 sheets where he always overprints the signs, and in the end they're totally vanished because he prints because of the process of overprinting. And here you see something that will also be interesting for the journey of our conversation. Here you see a kind of index, a kind of catalog with all the things he thinks that are important for his catalog.
Nagel, unendlich, Teller, Windung, Pfeil, Loch. That were some of the words for the people who can't read it, sitting that far in the audience. I will now be reading a part of a story that I made, or that I started writing here while I was during the residency in the Jan van Eyck, and I will elaborate afterwards on why I was reading it. It's called AI 2. The story starts at the intersection of an express road, in the midst of a deceleration. A car slows down, while the story gains speed. 2 opposite movements, gaining momentum and losing momentum. The resistance of the wind is similar to the processing of each word. Both are inevitably waiting for the silence, for the words to die down. The combustion engine sputters when the gears shift down. In the distance, the red of the approaching brake lights. What follows are a series of spontaneous actions, blinking, positioning, cursing for every minute that is lost indefinitely. These are the codes that we have written within ourselves, but what do they mean for the rest of this journey? Behind us lies one warehouse after another. There is the smell of roasted coffee beans and a first attempt at countryside since the parceled out excesses of the metropole. The withered remnants of a harvested field next to an overpriced gas station. The last of nature was scraped away decades ago, and in return we got a furniture shop, a silkscreen printer, a supermarket, a bathroom fitter, a car dealership, a pharmacy, a camping park, a concrete plant, a fish farm, a crane rental company, a pet boarding house. In other words, the building blocks of modern society. And if you drive long enough, you'll get to a point where the sequence just starts over, in a different order, like a deck of cards being shuffled, pizzeria, pharmacy, supermarket. This continuity is occasionally interrupted by an incomparable remnant from the past, the old fort, the botanical garden, or the rippling tributary. The yellow and red neon lighting of the modernist disco, where football players come to celebrate important wins, appeals to the imagination. They fill the void. The story begins when a station wagon slows down, the rear windows fogged up from the gleaming golden retrievers panting in the trunk. In the car itself, the musty smell of digested dog food the occupant slowly became accustomed to. The child wails. It should sit upright and look ahead to the horizon. Mother tells it to breathe. Sis calls it a charade. Father snarls at mother, do something. The child is forced to think about something else, but does not know how. She does not yet understand how the thoughts take possession of her, let alone how she can master them. List of Smurfs, asked the mother. I'll start. Brainy Smurf. Handy Smurf, says the sister. Papa Smurf, the child says, and it seems to work, as if it is being breathed into her by a higher power. She no longer thinks about the nausea, but about various Smurfs. They weren't her thoughts, and yet now they're only hers. Dad, Papa Smurf, says the father purposefully or just uninterested. Daddy, screams the sister, and this interruption breaks the child's concentration. My throat hurts, the child says, which usually means that the vomit isn't long in coming. From the moment a child is old enough to be behind the wheel of the car, the child starts to perceive their surroundings as a game. Everything reduced to pedals and buttons, obstacles and guidelines, a distance to travel and a time in which to do so. When the station wagon in front of her slows down traffic, she automatically wonders what this means. Why does this have to happen to her again? Accordingly, in the context of the car, the child is in competition with all other drivers. Are there more like her who think that fate can be avoided if only one is attentive enough? Surely, she can't be the only one who tries to take advantage of this glitch. The passengers she transports tell her they value their safety. They are all an obstruction, a challenge, just as the world is one designed to make her lose. So this is a small part of the story AI2 that is actually set on this road, the A12, and that was also, the full story was also published in the Jan van Eyck Elements book that recently came out with different texts from, amongst others, Persis Bekkering and me, and was really beautifully designed by Offshore Studio, who are also residents here. And it's, I don't know if it's for sale. Is it for sale on the web shop? I know it is for sale on the web shop, and so it's definitely something worth checking out. And why I read this is actually this text came to life while I was here on my residency, because in the beginning I was actually writing a lot, but then I also during the residency started drawing more and more. And one of these signs that you saw in the sign of the road is actually what my starting point was to make these drawings, because I had seen this sign in the side of the A12, and it has this, like you can see on the left, this very brutal depiction of a hand being penetrated by barbed wire, and it's next to the Fort van Breendonk, which was sort of, I don't think not really a concentration camp, but if not a concentration camp, then a sort of prison for people or rebels, and also a place of which deportation began to then the famous concentration camps. And this gruesome image always stuck to me, and I was surprised by the fact that I had probably driven by this road or by this point for maybe 1,000 times and had never seen it. And then I started looking actually for all the other signs, and I discovered that they were taken down 10 years ago, and some of them were replaced by pictures, but most of them disappeared. And then there's this really weird, luckily for me, community of road enthusiasts on the internet, and they have this forum where they share how signs look in Bratislava and how they look in the United States, and it's a hobby of people, and they helped me find a lot of these pictures of these old signs, and then I started drawing them one by one in a search of. In the hopes of finding this collective narrative, actually, of what Flanders might be, because it's a really political and ideological discourse that we're having in Belgium now, where there's this divide between Flanders and then the French side, Wallonia. But I'm obviously. I'm from Brussels, so that makes it even more difficult because I'm somewhere in the middle of this fight over territory and principles and language. And culturally, I'm probably Flemish because that's how I grew up and that's the television I watched. But I don't know what it means or what it feels like to be Flemish or what this actually was about. And I was hoping to find this by collecting these drawings and maybe see if we have this, maybe if I have this collective of images, then this could be this history or this ideological history on which this claim to Flanders is based. And the funny thing I had while anonymizing and making them more anonymous, by drawing them without a geographical location underneath and separate them from each other 2 by 3, it became this more universal story than the specific one I set out to look for. And because you have these playing cards, these flowers, these grapes, or this swimming, or the boats, and actually it's a way more universal story than I would have thought beforehand. It could have also been Bavaria or I don't know where some general European region. And so those are the drawings I showed in the first part of the Jan van Eyck exhibition, and this is how we made them. We tried to recreate the original brown by creating it on the paper by using these primary colors. So every print is printed 3 times and having this yellow, primary colors, blue and reds, layered over each other to create this brown, and you have this pixelated fragments of these older colors still in there somewhere. And so these are a couple of the details.
What is this actually?
This is an old ruin, or what? Did you really not see what it was?
Yeah, I was just curious about your interpretation.
Yeah. I think it's an old ruin, but I forgot where it's from. And this is from Hasselt, I know, but I don't know what the origin story is of this woman looking at the flower. Yeah, these are trees. Pillars, and this is this is how we hung them on the wall.
Yeah, and during this process, we also had a lot of discussions about the back color we wanted to have. We didn't want it to make aesthetic decisions. We wanted to make more or less conceptual decisions, which ended up in this orange tone we finally used then. And these boards you saw, these posters you saw on the beginning, is also a reflection of the discussion we had about this tone of like the color or the different stories that I was telling him during my research I did about Schmidt during the last couple of weeks. So this all merged into this presentation where we tried to give us the space for their own work, but also connect to the others. So we were using some of the exhibition design displays I already worked with, or I tried to also bring these fragments into the space, into the Jan van Eyck. And yeah, this was also a reason why I came up with this gigantic fabric, with this mannequin with the two genitals and the paper plane. And yeah, I'm still a little bit skeptical if I like it or not, but it's also about spatializing it, question the quality of these pictograms, which have a different story. It's not about the local sites or the environment or the special spaces of the specialties of a place. It's about the own identity of the artist, I would say, and about finding a way to communicate their own emotions. So I want to dive in a little bit into what is actually in this vitrine, and I'll give you also another small fragment of what I have researched and what Wolfgang Schmidt used his science for. So I think I give this to you. And if you go to the next slide, action group. Wolfgang Schmidt worked as a designer for two social activist groups in the 1970s. Both groups originated in Dreieichenhain, a small village 20 minutes outside of Frankfurt in Hessen. Schmidt lived there from 1961 until 1987, when he disappeared suddenly without a trace. One of the social activist groups Schmidt designed for was called the Heine Initiative. The group fought against the demolition of old uninhabited houses in the historic district. The group's overreaching mission was to inform the area's residents about sustainable urban development, including the implementation of car-free zones and the preservation of the city center. The second group Schmidt designed for was a women's group called Die Heiner Weiber. The group is still active today, organizing social events like museum visits, pottery workshops, language courses, or the annual Weibercup, a trans-regional event that takes place in Dreieichenhain, at which craftswomen can sell their wares. By designing and publishing calendars, this is what you see here, leaflets, and more, Schmidt found ways to support such groups and the community in which he lived through his art practice. The local characteristics, story, and personalities of Dreieichenhain all converge in his works, lending the community not only a visual representation, but also a medium for social exchange and shared identity. So what you see here are these sheets where he focused on different topics. Like here on the left, you see the mayor of the city, and in the middle you see these houses in the city center which needed to be renovated, and where there was a lot of fear that they get teared down. So what is interesting is how Schmidt utilized his science of life also to develop these pictograms, which were then used by these groups and also for posters and events. And this community aspect of his work was quite new to me. I spoke to several people of this village, and then I was able to get this calendar, for instance, and put it into the vitrine and see how he includes the people of this community in a like as a designer, but also I think as an author of these communication tools, I would say. And also new to me was something I found about his disappearance that is also very uncertain, and where I found a letter that is also part of the vitrine. I asked Victoria, the librarian of the Jan van Eyck, to read it for me for the presentation in the vitrine. But for this occasion, I will read it to you, if you...
Yes. But maybe you should tell maybe about about the disappearance, because I've always thought this was a very fascinating idea that he just vanished all of a sudden.
Yeah, I'll tell you what I found out. Wolfgang Schmidt disappeared in 1987, leaving all of his works and belongings behind in his apartment in Dreieichenhain. He left no information for his friends, nor a forwarding address. The circumstances of his disappearance can only be deducted from speculations of his friends at the time, several of whom were interviewed for this project. A life-threatening illness and difficulties with tax authorities were hinted as possible reasons. He was later identified at a train station by former students. That led to a search operation. Posters were hung up at several train stations in and around Frankfurt. This letter was sent by two of his friends to homeless shelters all over Germany. Dearest Wolfgang, we want to inform you that your apartment in Dreieichenhain still exists. The rent is being paid alternately by your friends. We would like to hold on to it for you in case you can ever want to return and take up your work that we know you most continually love. Renate Gerhardt is looking for you because without you she can't make any books. Heidi Hoffmann is waiting for you as the Ecken exhibition is now traveling to Switzerland, and also because of your contract with the museum. Rolf Lobeck is offering you a teaching position in Kassel. The Merz Academy definitely wants to give you a job with tenure. Since everyone has called everyone looking for you, we heard the tax authorities are causing you some pains. Some people have asked specialists to look into your situation. The takeaway was basically always the same. The matter will take care of itself. Through indeed, you should immediately enter an objection. Only you can do this personally, and the sooner the better. Afterwards, there are some really competent people who will be able to help you. That is, lift the burden from your shoulders. Your doctor is also uneasy about how much time has passed since you have last been in to see him. He's silent about it, as doctors generally are about such things. But he's concerned. Both Renate Gerhardt and Rolf Loback said they have enough room to spare your studio and a living space. But of course, you are just now finding this out, that you will be able to choose between your current apartment and two new ones free of charge. You also cannot have known how much we are racking our brains, Ellen more than anyone, to save all of your things in case the apartment has to be cleared out. Optimistic that you get this letter and read it, we have decided to pay your rent for another 2 months, until May 1988. Please let us know if we should keep the flat for you. Please let someone know, even on a postcard, what you want, in case you don't want to call or come and handle it in person. Yours sincerely, Abizak and Michael, March 26, 1988. Wolfgang Schmidt died in 1995 in the care of his sister without saying goodbye to any of his friends. So this is all I got to know, actually.
It's a sad conclusion. We try to create a sort of homage to Wolfgang Schmidt, who tried during his life to find a way to create a whole language that was completely based out of science, that you actually wouldn't need language anymore or just have this own language. And so as I read the words out loud in German earlier, we created these English emoji translations of words to wave you all goodbye. Horror. Prestige. warmth, difference, truth, gradients, courage, learning, yearning, illusion, guilt, oral, storm, temporary, disgrace, pie, liaison, presence, testimony, tribe, gratitude, cure, deformation, appointment, costume, goalkeeper, crack, unrest, invisible, perception, protests, tourists, revolution, design, support, inflation, sleep. That was it.
Another slide?
What?
What's beyond that? It's after the.
I don't know. Yeah, but I didn't understand the question Maxime asked me. So. Okay.
Okay, I guess that's it. It's a wrap, guys. Thank you so much, Maxime and Frederic.
Thank you for having us.
You just concluded the whole Open Studios public program. How do you feel?
Happy that I only know this now.
Good, good. I'll give the word to Hisham in a few minutes, but I want to thank everyone who contributed, not only to the public program, but to the Open Studios in general, all the participants who put an incredible amount of work, dedication, and fun into it, and also the staff who is here and who's not here. So a round of applause for these amazing group. Hisham.
Thank you, Bruno. You are such an amazing presenter. Thank you for that. Yes, an applause for Bruno for everything that he's been doing. This is like a marathon. Thank you both. This is amazing. Meeting each other and then coming up with this collaboration. This is really nice, and I love the last word. Sleep.
Yes.
That we all may go into sleep. I just wanted to thank everyone. All the participants, all the staff, everybody that was involved in making such a beautiful Open Studios. It's 7 days, first time we've ever done so long. Normally it's just 3 days. It's been like a sort of a festival, camping out together for 2 weeks, being together, eating, having sessions such as this. A lot of them that grew naturally. Some were improvised, some were structured and programmed. Yeah, I need to go back. Okay, yeah, for the television. Yeah, okay. I would also like to thank all our partners who were part of this, and they are many, and also everyone that has always been so supportive of the Jan van Eyck Academy year through for a long time now. And I wanted to invite you to come and eat the nicest dish that Marente makes, which is patatje oorlog. French fries with peanut butter sauce and mayonnaise. We're gonna serve it in a minute and have a little drink, and then we can have a little, yeah, how does one say? Go into sleep.
We need a sign for that,
Yeah.
wait.
And can I have an applause for all of you and the public and everyone? Thank you so much.